Alright, so it's about a week late, but that's much better than being lost and having to go through that ordeal. But FedEx finally came through and delivered my 2022 Shimano Aldebaran BFS. Now, I got this from Japan Lure Shop, and let's not waste any more time, because this is probably the most anticipated bait finesse reel of all time. Alright, so immaculately packaged as usual, and he gave me a Vision 110 Junior. It looks like some kind of a sexy shad chrome pattern, so that's actually a really good color. I'm going to lay that off to the side, and of course we're gonna throw all that off to the side. And yes, I got a left-handed reel, and that's due to the fact that I wanted to experience this reel and I didn't want to wait until April, which is when the right-handers are supposed to come out. So let's do this. I do have a right-hander on pre-order, and if you guys give me 2,000 likes on this video, because I know it's going to get way more than 2,000 views, once I get my right-handed reel in, I will give this left-hander away. So give me 2,000 likes, and sometime after April, once I get my right-hander, I will give this away to a lucky left-handed subscriber. Alright, so so we got a matte soft touch box, and let's open this thing up. Paperwork. You only get one oil. Let's see what kind of oil this is. This is BFS oil. So that's strange. Normally you get two, but maybe they are changing things up at Shimano with the bait finesse reels. So we're going to lay this off to the side. And let's open this thing up. Okay, so I'm actually going to give you guys a more up-close view of this reel. And as you can see, it's got a bluish tint. And yeah, check it out. There's that controversial side view. But the finish, thankfully, is not a matte satiny finish. It's more of a gloss, shiny finish, which feels better in hand. Check out the new thumb bar, the new knobs. It's a new handle that's retaining the yellow or gold anodization. There's the new 6-pointed drag star. So what do you guys think of the looks? It's definitely toned down from the previous model. And overall, I think it's a good looking reel, but once again, I wish they would have chromed this dial. That would have made it look better and more high-end. But yeah, check out that front. It's very, very busy. A lot of things going on there. Okay, so the first thing that I notice is that turning the handle, at least after taking it out of the box, it is noticeably smoother than the old model. Now the old model, for some reason, when you just crank the handle with the drag loosened and you don't have any kind of resistance on it. So let's say you were in the store and you pick this up and you turn the handle. It really didn't feel that smooth. It didn't feel very Shimano-like, but once you got on the water, tightened up the drag, and started fishing, especially a lure that had some resistance, let's say an inline spinner, then you could feel the smoothness. But just messing around with it, it didn't feel as smooth as other Shimanos, but this new model definitely does. And I can definitely feel the micro module gears adding to that smoothness. Now once again, I'm right-handed, so it feels kind of weird palming this, but yeah, I can feel that brake dial, which was a point of controversy for me, because you can see it sticking out, and hopefully you guys can see or can't see, but the numbers are still very, very faint. They really need to brighten these numbers up so us older guys can see better. So yeah, this brake dial, while the reel is very small and comfortable, I can definitely feel it pushing into the meat of my finger. Now whether that's going to translate into discomfort out on the water, that remains to be seen, but that is definitely still a disappointment, just like I had stated in the preview videos of this reel. But the thumb bar, you can see it's changed. It's now chrome with no kind of, I guess, plastic piece for grip. And you can definitely see that they kept the cone-shaped, oval-shaped line guide. There's the spool tension. For my particular reel, it is super hard to turn, and of course it does not click. The handle, they say it has been shortened to 80 millimeters. I think it personally looks better than the old handle. It looks more robust. You can definitely see this cheap plastic looking retainer there. I wish they would have went with something higher end looking. And yes, just as I predicted, the drag star, it is made of CI4+. But it's still big, so I guess if you have a bigger hand, you can still reach over and flick it in order to just subtly move your bait along the bottom. But the reel itself feels a bit wide for me to be able to do that, at least with my middle finger. I'll have to use my, I guess, this finger right here if I wanted to do that. But yeah, this is the new 2022 Aldebaran BFS. I got the HG model, and the only other gear ratio it comes in is the XG. And we're going to get into what a lot of you guys have been waiting for, and that is some size comparisons versus other bait finesse reels. Okay, so I pulled out several different reels to compare sizes with, and we're going to start off with the KASTKING Zephyr. And hopefully you guys can see the Zephyr is, of course, bigger. It is longer, maybe a little bit wider, but the new Aldebaran doesn't seem quite as tiny as a lot of people might have thought it was going to be. Now when you look from the side, when I line up the reel foots, you can see that the Aldebaran is noticeably lower than the Zephyr. But it's kind of funny, when I mounted this on a rod, even though, you know, I'm not left-handed, it doesn't feel super tiny. But I'm gonna have to make final judgment on that once I get my right-handed reel in. Alright, so the next reel is gonna be the Black Knight 2, which of course shares the same frame as the Tsurunoya Dark Wolf. And I don't know if you guys can see, but it looks like the Black Knight 2 seems to be a smaller reel than the new Aldebaran. Especially when you look at him from the top, this way. So I'm gonna switch sides here, and let me know what you guys think. Which reel looks smaller to you? The Aldebaran looks wider, and when you compare side view, try to line up the reel feet there, it looks like the Aldebaran is lower, but you can see just how much of the side plate is hanging lower than the reel seat, which kind of makes it, I guess, not feel quite as small as it really is. Kind of like the Shimano CURADO K. Alright, next up is going to be a comparison with the very tiny CURADO BFS. And from this angle, it looks like the CURADO is smaller, and noticeably so. Now, if we switch sides, it looks like the CURADO is still smaller to me. And you can definitely see that the side plate on the CURADO is smaller than the Aldebaran. But when you line up the reel feet, it looks like the Aldebaran is way lower in height. Alright, next up is going to be probably the Aldebaran's main competition. That's going to be the Alpha's Air TW. And when you look at them like this, it looks to me like the Alpha's is smaller. Well, maybe the same size, but the top plate of the Aldebaran definitely sticks out a lot further. So that means we've got to switch up sides there. And what do you guys think? It's hard to judge because the Alpha's, the top plate doesn't stick out quite as far. But they look very similar in size as far as width goes and length. And let's check out the profiles. Now, when I line up the reel feet, it looks like the Aldebaran is lower, and that's pretty impressive considering how small the spool is on the Alphas. Alphas is one of the most comfortable reels that I have, but once again, I'm gonna have to pass judgment once I get my right-handed model. But yeah, you can just see how big the side plate is on the Aldebaran. Alright, so the last comparison is the one you've all been waiting for, and that is how does the new reel compare to the old reel when it comes to size. And from this angle, it looks like the new reel is smaller. And once again, let me know what you think as far as which reel looks smaller. Okay, now we switch sides, and I don't know, it's very close. It's very close. I still think that the CURADO and the Scorpion and the SLX BFS is a smaller reel than this new 2022 Aldebaran. Alright, now here's side plate comparison. And it looks like the new model is much lower. But when I was palming it, I could definitely feel the massiveness of the side plate of the new Aldebaran. But compared to the old Aldebaran, the side plate does look smaller. So for all you guys that have the old model, you were hoping for a significantly smaller new model. Doesn't look like you're gonna get your wish, but that's okay because the old model was still a super comfortable reel to palm, probably in the top 5. Alright, so the last comparison I'm gonna make is gonna be a color comparison, because I thought that the new Aldebaran was gonna be the same color as the 2018 Aldebaran MGL, and it's actually not. It's actually more of a, I don't even know how to call it. It's closer to turquoise than the Aldebaran MGL. So yeah, it's going to be very hard to match this reel up to a rod unless the rod is, you know, all black or something like that. I prefer the color on the MGL over the new 22 BFS. But yeah, there's a color comparison for you guys. And let's get to the important stuff. So I'm going to take just a couple of moments to explain to you guys what is the same and what's different between the old and the new model. Now, the new 2022 Aldebaran is an entirely new reel, but the frame and side plate material is the same as the old model. So it's got a magnesium frame and CI4 plus side plates. And the new model retains the much coveted feature of having a clicking drag. And let you guys listen to it. And let's compare it with the old model. So hopefully you guys can tell through the, I guess, camera microphone, but the drag clicker on the new model has a slightly deeper tone and it doesn't sound quite as plasticky as the old model. And I don't think it's quite as loud either. So they kind of toned down the sound of the drag clicker on the new model, which is something that I welcome. Now let's go over the changes. Now the new model picked up one extra ball bearing somewhere, so it has a bearing count of 10+1, while the old model had a 9+1 bearing count. For some reason they shortened the handle on the new model to 80 millimeters, while the old one had an 84 millimeter handle. So you can see right there, and I think they did this to save weight, but right here you can see that they have new knobs and knob end caps for the new reel. So it's not quite as rounded off at the end, it's more of a triangle shape at the end, but here are the new end caps for the knobs. Hopefully you guys can see that. I think they definitely look better than the knob end caps of the old model. And of course this is personal preference, but right here you can see that once again the drag star remains 6 point, but on the new model it's made of Ci4 Plus instead of aluminum, which is a downgrade in my opinion. But they kind of made up for it because it looks much better as it's far more chiseled and detailed, as you can see. Now of course the nut retainers are a little different, both of them ugly. The thumb bar is new, and I think I prefer the thumb bar of the old model just for the grip, but it's no longer that asymmetrical shape, it's symmetrical all the way across. Now luckily the new model's thumb bar is still very firm. There's no mush, no wiggle, which is a positive. And one of the biggest upgrades on this new model is the inclusion of the micro module gears. So the new model, at least turning the handle here at home, it is super smooth. It doesn't feel like it has gear teeth. I'm pretty sure the new micro gears added some weight because they're generally bigger than average gears. But yeah, it is very smooth and definitely a welcome improvement versus the old model. Now the spool tension of the new model is newer and very plain looking, which is unfortunate in my opinion because the spool tension of the old model had the gold trim and the different, I guess, knurling that made it easier to turn than this new model. So that's a step backwards in my opinion on the spool tension cap. Now one thing that's improved on the new model as well, something that most people are not going to pay attention to, but that is going to be the side plate trim, which is this plastic piece. And check it out on the old model. Kind of just a plain Jane black plastic piece there. Now with the new model there's a lot more going on with that side plate trim, and hopefully you guys can see you got this matte black piece, but then you have this shiny gloss black plastic piece on the inside of that. Like I said, you're probably never going to even notice this unless you really study this reel. Now overall, as far as looks go, I know it's subjective, but let me know in the comment section whether you think the new model took a step backwards in looks versus the old model. Now the body style of the old model, when I first saw pictures of that online, I thought it was butt ugly. But once I got it, it really grew on me. But Shimano's definitely softened up the looks with the new model. It doesn't have quite as many sharp edges, especially with the nose piece there. But with that being said, it's time to get into probably the two biggest and most important changes to the new reel, and that's going to be that spool and the braking system. Okay, so as you can see, the scale is out, and I'm going to get a weight on some other BFS reels before we get to the weight on the new Aldebaran. Alright, so the first reel is going to be the CURADO BFS, coming in at 6.2 ounces. Now the second reel is going to be the Abu Garcia LX 992Z, coming in at 5.6 ounces. Next up is going to be the Alphas Air TW. Now I was going to weigh the Gekabidgen Air as well, but I seem to have misplaced that reel somewhere. But the Alphas Air is at 5.6 ounces. Alright, next up is going to be the Black Knight 2. And it's coming in at 4.78 ounces. So the first reel coming in at under 5 ounces so far. Alright, now here's the 2016 Aldebaran. 4.71. Now they were advertising this reel at coming in at 4.6 ounces, but on my scale it says 4.71. And according to Shimano Japan's website, the new reel is supposed to weigh 1 gram heavier than the old reel. But before we find out if that's true, this is supposed to be the lightest bait finesse reel in the world, the REVO LTX BF8 from Abu Garcia, coming in at 4.63. Now it's supposed to weigh 4.5 ounces, but it is time for the new 2022 Aldebaran, and the scale says 4.67. It's actually lighter than the old model. Huh. .71. Now of course you're not really going to be able to feel that minuscule weight loss, but it's good to know that it did lose some weight. So if the REVO is not in production anymore, which I don't think it is, that makes the new 2022 Aldebaran the lightest bait finesse reel in the world today. Alright, so now let's get to the weight that we've all been waiting for, and that is the spool weight. Okay, so the special spool scale's out, and while I was waiting for this reel to arrive, right on cue, all the Japanese fishing YouTubers that I subscribe to started releasing their videos on this reel. Some of them are releasing multiple videos already, but I actually made a special effort not to watch those videos because I didn't want to know what the spool weight was. I wanted to discover it once I got my reel. So let's take a look at the spool real quick, and it is designated as the MGL3 spool design. So that means it's narrower, and of course we know that Shimano shrunk it down and made it smaller as well. So when you compare it to the old reel, you can definitely see that it is much smaller and it is slightly thinner. And one thing you can definitely see is that there's hardly any porting on the spool. I mean, there's a couple of holes there, a couple of holes there, and yeah, I think there's only 6 holes. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, only 6 holes on this spool, which is very strange because usually bait finesse spools are drilled full of holes to make them lighter, of course. So let's go ahead and pop the spool out. Now the way to open up the side plate is the same as the old model. This little latch right here. Twist the side plate down, and once again give you guys a closer look at how far that brake dial sticks out. Very cheap looking. But anyway, here are the new brakes, which I'm gonna go over here in a second. But yeah, let's pop this spool out, and yeah, check that out. Still retaining the long spool shaft, still appears to be made of steel, not aluminum. There is a little bearing there. It is very heavily ported in the middle. Still pretty shallow. It's got an O-ring on this end of the spool shaft, but it feels pretty light. Now once again, it is 29 millimeters in diameter, and the width I think is 19 millimeters across. So here's the new spool in comparison to the old spool, and when you pull them out and stick them side by side, there is definitely a big size difference there. Looks like the new spool is slightly deeper than the old one, which is to be expected, so it can hold the same amount of line. But yeah, 32 by 22 millimeters, 29 by 19 millimeters. Now let's compare these bearings. You can see the new bearing is definitely bigger than the super small micro bearing of the old spool. And yeah, the new spool of the new 2022 Aldebaran BFS. It's definitely got some big shoes to fill. Alright, so let's turn on the scale. And we're going to weigh the old spool first. 7.79, so pretty much 7.8 grams with the bearing. I believe it weighed about 7.2 without the bearing. And let's see what the new one weighs. Wow, 6.61. Now keep in mind that is with the bearing, and it is a slightly bigger bearing. And I don't know how much the bearing weighs, so I am going to remove it and we're going to get a true weight on this spool. But it definitely lost more weight than I thought it would. I thought Shimano would probably give it maybe a 0.3 or 0.4 or half a gram weight loss tops, but let's find out. Okay, so the spool bearing's off, and let's take a look at it real quick. Now, like I said, it doesn't look quite as small as the spool bearing of the old reel, but it is still very, very small. And in fact, I still consider this a micro bearing, because here's the standard spool bearing of a regular reel. You can see it's much smaller, and you can see there is an O-ring on the spool bearing, and I think this is the silent tune feature, which personally I wish Shimano would go back to the spring-loaded silent tune, because this O-ring can create a vacuum to where your spool doesn't move from side to side no matter how loose your spool tension is. And to solve that problem, you have to literally take the side plate off and take the spool out and put it back in. That's something that I found with the BANTAM. Alright, so let's get down to business, and I'm thinking this is probably going to be somewhere in the low 6 gram range. Boom! 5.874 grams. Wow. Let's weigh that again. Well, this time 5.873, but it is under 6 grams. And this is shocking to me, and let me tell you why. Now, about 10 years ago, the big three over in Japan, Shimano, DAIWA, Abu Garcia, all at the same time started getting serious about making dedicated BFS reels. And in fact, DAIWA and Abu Garcia had a small spool weight war where they were showing off just how light their spools were. And this was all before Shimano came out with the 2016 Aldebaran BFS. And the reason why this is so shocking is because even with the 2016 model, when they released that spool was still heavier than the competing reels from Abu Garcia and DAIWA that had been out for quite a few years already. So Shimano didn't even bother to participate in that small BFS spool weight war. But it looks like this time around they are taking no prisoners, because this is the first stock JDM BFS spool that I know of that comes in at under 6 grams. And just to show you comparison with what is probably the Aldebaran's biggest rival, here is the spool of the Alpha's Air TW. You can see that it is slightly smaller in diameter, 28 millimeters versus 29, but the Aldebaran is slightly thinner, but it's got a long spool shaft. But I took the spool bearing off the Alphas, looking at 6.19, pretty much 6.2 grams versus 5.8, pretty much almost 5.9 grams, so a 0.3 gram difference. And in bait finesse, that's pretty significant. So I wonder how they got the spool so light, even though it's mostly unported. So this tells me that Shimano could have easily made this spool much lighter by just drilling it out with holes. But maybe they're gonna do that on the next model, whenever that comes out in a few years. So it looks like the new Aldebaran BFS is gonna be the king of lightweight spools when it comes to the JDM models, but it still lags behind the ridiculously lightweight spools of the Black Knight 2 and the Dark Wolf Ultra. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up a graphic on the screen for you, and you're going to see where the Aldebaran spool sits in the hierarchy of spool weights when it comes to the current bait finesse reels. Okay, so now that we see that the new Aldebaran has set new standards in spool weight for JDM BFS reels, let's talk about my one big concern about that. Now, if you watch the cast battle between the 2016 Aldebaran BFS versus the Alpha's Air TW, you'll know that when it comes to, I guess, normal bait finesse lure weights, I'm talking 1/16 of an ounce and up, even though the Aldebaran had a much heavier spool, it easily beat out the Alphas, especially with the heavier lures, and that's because the Alpha's spool was too small and it needs to rotate a lot more to cast the same distance as the bigger spooled Aldebaran. And since the new spool is closer to the size of the Alpha spool instead of the old spool, my fear is that it's going to suffer the same fate. But let me show you what Shimano has done, at least hopefully, to alleviate that potential problem. And that is modify the brakes on the new reel. Now here's the new brakes, and there were no extra magnets in the box. And let me show you guys something. None of these magnets are removable. They're all glued in. Now it's still a dynamic system, meaning that one side of each bank of magnets is spring-loaded, as you can see. This side is not. But what Shimano said is they made it so the new reel can be adjusted to nearly zero magnetic brakes. So I have the brakes extended to their maximum position, and here's the side plate of the old reel, and these brakes are also extended to their maximum position, and hopefully you guys can see it's about the same. They stick out about the same, and you can definitely see the smaller size of the new brake hub. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to retract the brake hubs to their minimum position, and let's see if there's a difference. Okay, so there's the minimum position for the old model. You can see there's still plenty of magnet exposed. Now I complained about this brake dial, but it's actually pretty easy to turn, but there's just enough resistance so you can't accidentally turn it without a little bit of force. But there are the new brakes. As you can see, they are pretty much sunk into this round plastic piece, and you can definitely see the difference between the two. So I think that's Shimano's way of hopefully allowing the spool to spin up much faster and keep up its spool speed versus DAIWA's overbraked air brake system. Now here's the issue I see with this. I've never been able to get close to the #1 setting or the minimum brake setting on the old reel. In fact, I don't think I've ever gotten it past 3. So in my mind, going down to almost zero brake means spool blow-ups. But I think Shimano implemented something, hopefully, to address that. And that is this metal ring. Hopefully you guys can see. There's a little metal ring circling this plastic piece. And in my opinion, this little metal ring is actually going to allow you to use less brakes on this new model. And let me show you why. Now here is the MagForce braking system of the current DAIWA STEEZ SVTW. And here is the braking of the 2020 TATULA SVTW. Now whenever I do cast battles with the TATULAs, I always get morons in the comments section saying, "You had the brakes set up too high because on my STEEZ or on my ZILLION, I could go down way lower." Well, for one thing, this is a TATULA, not a STEEZ or a ZILLION. And yes, I found that with this STEEZ, you can go down really, really low on the brakes. I'm talking almost zero. And I believe the reason is this. These two rings that actually house the magnets on the STEEZ are made of metal, while on the TATULA, they're plastic. So the magnets are actually magnetizing both of these metal rings, which allows the STEEZ to go lower on its brakes. It's kind of like a trick. And I think that's the reason Shimano put this metal ring, in order to give it a little bit of magnetism, which allows you to go lower on the brake dial. Now, will that translate into longer casting? I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see. But I can tell you this, I don't think I've ever got a Shimano that went backwards in performance. So I'll be happy if this reel casts just as good as the old model when it comes to regular BFS weights, but it should definitely beat out the old model when it comes to casting the 1 gram trout magnet. But of course, we're not going to find out until I take it out on the water. Okay guys, there we go. The unboxing and tabletop analysis of the new 2022 Aldebaran BFS. A reel that has enormous shoes to fill because the old model that it's replacing went out on top of the bait finesse world. Now, my initial thoughts are that it took a small step backwards in palming comfort because of that protruding brake dial that's exposed fully, but it took definitely a couple of steps forward because the new reel is noticeably smoother than the old reel. And as we can see, Shimano gave the new spool a huge weight reduction and hopefully modified the brakes to compensate for the reduction in spool size as well. So the next thing I'm going to do is I think I'm actually going to just take this reel trout fishing with a trout magnet. And then after that, we're going to do a comparison with the old model when it comes to casting. So be on the lookout for that. And once again, if you guys give me 2,000 likes, once I get my right-handed model in, I will have a contest and give this left-handed model away to one of you lucky subscribers. So leave me a comment on what you think of this new model. Is it everything that you hoped it would be, or is it a big disappointment? Alright guys, thanks a lot.